Sometime you win, sometime we win.
So there you go. I'm John Kane, and I welcome you to Let's Talk Native on this Saturday, October 5th. While this program may not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do encourage and in some cases start conversations. We don't do prayers and we don't do buffalo speeches. We take a tough look at our history, oppression, and survival. We talk about culture, the arts, politics, and identity, and we do step on a few toes along the way. But our real goal here is to bring people together by breaking down what separates us. We will take on the false narratives and provide critical thinking to all that is heaped upon us. And we do it all right here from the Cattaraugus territory of the Sanger Nation. So let's talk Native. But first, let me remind people you can catch this show streaming live as far as the audio goes on our website, which is www.letstalknative.com. We stream live video of the show on Facebook via Facebook Live on various Facebook group pages. We take the audio and we put it up on SoundCloud so it becomes a podcast on any of your favorite podcast platforms. We take the video and we put it up on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. Encourage you to subscribe to the podcast and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and please spread the word. We try to have conversations that warrant conversations, so we can empower ourselves to confront some of the very issues that we are faced with all the time. I want to talk about resistance today, so that's kind of what we're going to talk about. But first, let me again introduce myself. I'm John Kane. I'm the show's host and producer, and I'm joined in studio by Jake Proud, who's managing our video and our sound. Yes, let's talk Native resistance, because look, we have an awful lot, a lot of people who want to characterize some of their actions or their existence as resistance. In fact, that's one of the expressions, right? Our existence is resistance. Well, I think it depends on what we're existing as. You know, we've talked about unwe and what that really means, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more here today. But I do want to push back on some of the conversations about briefcase warriors, like somehow the Harvard law degree is what is providing our resistance to and resistance to what? Because I think if we aren't resisting assimilation, then we aren't resisting, and if we're adopting the terms of assimilation, if we're becoming more and more American, if we embrace U.S. citizenship ahead of our own and ahead of our own identity, then again, I go back to that question. Our existence is resistance. Existing as what? This is part of the challenge. And, I hear plenty of people telling folks to go out and vote, run for office. But they're not talking about Native office. They're talking about voting in the Euro-colonial elections, the Canadian elections, the U.S. elections, state elections, provincial elections. Look, I follow politics as much as anybody, and I don't question that their politics impacts us, but it's still their politics. And I think any attempt that we make or to become a part of them with some some notion that we're going to somehow protect ourselves. I literally heard somebody arguing with me, the only way to protect ourselves is to vote in their elections. Well, how is that protecting ourselves? Obviously I say the exact opposite. I believe that the more we assimilate and the more that they can claim that they represent us in their politics, in their governance, the less secure we are as autonomous and as distinct. Without even getting into the word sovereign and sovereignty, which is more about power than identity. But if we give that up, if we register our homes as a part of some state or federal legislative district, then what are we saying? And if we're doing so because we think that in that process, in that system, is where we're going to provide resistance, well, I think it's not just a fantasy. It is. I mean, it's not even a well-founded fantasy. It's one thing to have of a belief or faith, but there's no strategy there. As distinct people, as people who again, not just, it isn't even about governance, tribal governance, and I hate to use that word, but for lack of a better word, I guess. It's not about, our own governance. I mean, it is partially, but that's not what we're defined by either. See, the box is theirs that we keep trying to put ourselves in. I mean, even words like citizenship. Look, if I say that I'm Gunyaga, that's not the same thing as me saying, well, I'm a member or a citizen of the Mohawk Nation. Because every one of those things, all three of those words, citizen, Mohawk, and nation, none of those three words are ours. So we have to rethink about how do we view ourselves? And I come back to the word ungwe, a human being, ungwe, forever. And forever in both directions. So what makes a real human being? Well, I'll tell you what makes a real human being is understanding our connectivity to creation. And that, of course, includes land. The reason that we're ungwe and others aren't is because they can't even pretend to have the connection. Look, I hear white people say all the time, well, I was born here. That makes me a Native American. Well, you can keep that word. But, I mean, if you're just going to play semantics with it, I guess. But it doesn't make you doesn't make you Ungwe, doesn't make you a native person. So these are the conversations that, for one, we have to own some of this stuff. I think it's fine to say that our existence is our resistance if we are existing within our own Ungwe identity. But if we're not, if we're only existing as shadows of who we once were, and when I say once, I don't mean just shadows of who we were 10 years ago. I mean shadows of who we were hundreds of years ago, because I think we've got to go back a ways. I think we got to go back, 7, maybe even 8 generations before we can really view ourselves independent of colonialism and the effects of colonialism. Look, they've been at it for a long time, ever since they washed up on our shores. They've been doing a lot of things. I mean, I've talked about residential schools. I've talked about, the doctrine of Christian discovery. I've talked about, the massacres and the racist policies, the abject poverty that Native people live. Look, all that stuff is imposed. But at some point, if we stop resisting that stuff, if we just accept our lot in life as to what they've handed us, one of the things that got me going on this, I saw a post, I don't know if it was yesterday or today, and it was about Wes Studi being honored by the Academy Awards with an Oscar, Lifetime Achievement Award. And when it listed him, it says Vietnam veteran and Native American Wes Studi. Now, what did being a Vietnam veteran have to do with him receiving an Academy Award? I mean, how was that the first identifier? Well, I'll tell you one of the reasons, because it was a military, I think it was on some sort of military post website or something like that. But still, it didn't say Cherokee or use the Cherokee word for Cherokee. It didn't really identify him by something that should identify him, that should have been more of an identifier for him. Vietnam veteran. I mean, look, and I know how impassioned people are about things like their war service and again, the code talkers and stuff like that. But if you're 90 years old and you're still being identified by the couple of years that the United States was exploiting our language for the military, if that's what you're still being identified, what did the hell that happened with the rest of your life? Again, when we talk about identity, we can choose to put forth what we want to be identified as. And look, if you're Native and you want to be identified as a veteran, if that's the first thing that you want to be identified before you say Onondaga or Gunyaga or Onyotaaga or Navajo or Dene or Anishinaabe, Lakota, if you want to use that out, if you want to use American or Indian, I just say that words matter. And I think when we talk about resistance and when we talk about our existence being that resistance, it has to come back to what we're existing as. We have to take responsibility for our identity. And if we're not going to correct when somebody else improperly identifies us, I mean, when I hear a white person tell me, well, you don't look very native, and then the same person will say, did you know that Iron Ice Cody wasn't native? Yeah, I knew it. But that's the image you have. That's how you think that somebody has to be identified. You think you laying your eyes on me is your opportunity to identify who or what I am. That somehow I don't get to identify myself or anybody else. And look, I'm not saying, when I condemn the briefcase warrior, concept, I'm not saying the only way to resist is to pick up a gun and toe the line against, against the enemy forces. Some of us have done that. But that's not the only form of resistance. You know where some of this resistance lies? Again, in identity. What are we teaching our kids? How are we conducting ourselves in our community? Again, a lot of people want to identify themselves by the career they chose. Iron worker, pipe fitter, operator, And I think if somebody's asking a question about what do you do for a living, that's fine. But if you're identifying, again, your existence is the first way that you identify yourself is how you, again, what your employment is, then you are, if that's how you do, then that's what you're representing yourself as. So I think, again, if we're going to talk about our existence being our resistance, then how is being an iron worker, resistance? How is being a congresswoman being resistance? That's not resistance. So again, if you're a teacher, if you're helping to shape our young minds, if you're putting crops in the ground, if you're doing some of the stuff that our people did long before the first white man came here, then now that existence is your resistance, sure. So I think that's some of what we have to grab a piece of that. And we have to begin to identify ourselves in a way that talks about our relationship to creation, to our homes, to our people, to our family, to our community. These are the things that we need to identify ourselves at. How do you serve your people? And who do you serve? Because look, even if it's just your family, even if you don't do much outside of your own household, well, it'd be great if you did more than that. But but at least that's something. I have no problems with somebody saying, "Well, I'm a father, or a grandfather, or a mother, or a grandmother, or an aunt." Look, because there's a whole responsibility that comes with that. I think that's a fine way to identify yourself, because you're identifying yourself by your relationship. So I'm fine with. And look, I'm not condemning people who are using some of these other perspectives to identify themselves. I'm just saying, think about it. I'm not saying it's wrong, but again, if we're going to go back to that, and I love the expression, I love the whole concept that we can put forward, that our existence is a resistance. I love that. If depending on what we're existing as. So we go back to that word unwe. I mean, as a word that doesn't just define Gunjagahag or Unundawag or Dene or Lakota. I mean, it's a word that we use to define all of us, because it's not the word. A lot of times we think that to translate something, it's a word in, word out. I mean, when we use the word, I use the word native. I don't use Indian. I don't use Native American. Even indigenous. My hat says make. I don't know, what's it say? Make America indigenous again or something. I mean, I'm not even sure which hat I have on. But the word indigenous I have a problem with. And why do I have a problem with the word indigenous? Because there's multiple definitions. Among the definitions are, talks about being native to a soil, to a place. But in the international definition of indigenous, it frames it as descendants of an original people. That have been colonized. Well, I don't want to be framed within some colonial perspective, and I don't consider myself just a descendant of Native people. I am a Native person. I'm not the descendant of Ongwe. I am Ongwe. So this is part of the conversation that I think, is probably worth having. If not having the conversation, at least thinking about it. I think we just have to at least think about it. Because this, if we're going to refer to ourselves, if we're going to talk about resistance, what are we resisting? Because I'm not saying that we're providing adequate resistance, because I think we have been at this for a long time, and we've been on the short end, and we've been beaten down pretty good. And even as we have gained some prosperity, through, however there was a time that it was Native people couldn't even work off the territory. I mean, that whole expression, well, that such and such has gone off the reservation. That meant that they were wild or, untamed. I mean, even here in places like Cattaraugus, you'd only have to talk to, people a little older than me and say, no, we never went to town. Why? Because they weren't welcome. So there wasn't, there wasn't job opportunities. I mean, look, my father's generation were the ones that really started promoting the idea of working in high steel. And it's that same generation. And I don't mean just my father because he's Mohawk, but I mean all of working in the trades, the building trades. Native people proved themselves capable in those trades. But we didn't have a whole lot of that work off of our territory, for a long time. We lived once we had lost so much of our lands, gave some of it up or had it swindled out from underneath us or whatever else. Our affluence in terms of quality of life diminished significantly. And, poverty was something that we were strongly stricken with. And the ability to again, to provide for ourselves became very limited. Now, some of that opened up as our people proved themselves in some of the workforce out there. And of course, there's a lot of opportunities now that didn't exist. I mean, people can go to Harvard and become that briefcase warrior. And of course, we've built economies. We've got gas and tobacco and gaming. So we have developed a certain level of affluence. Although the more affluence that developed, the more disparity, wealth disparity increased, on our territories. The haves and the have-nots. We still have people very, very poor. It's just that now we have some people who are very, very wealthy. But we haven't lifted all of ourselves up. So, but even as we developed that wealth, we became so conscious about what it meant. There's a French word. It means the nouveau riche. It means the new rich. And it usually means it's meant as an insult. Because if you're nouveau riche, it means that you're still just a thug with money. That you're not sophisticated. You're not, you're crude. Well, our people started struggling to, they wanted to become more sophisticated. They wanted to look like they deserved the wealth that they acquired. And so how do you do that? Well, you assimilate. You start looking a lot like the very people that we've been fighting for hundreds of years. You start acting very much the same. You hire some white accountants and a bevy of white lawyers to defend everything you're doing. And we're not defending it by going to the streets anymore. I mean, the 90s, remember the 90s? When fighting for something meant shutting the thruway down? Or really taking a physical stand? Now we look for that, that lawyer who's going to come in and, create some sort of legal argument that allows us to, file for an injunction. Oh, that's going to teach them. And that's how we look at resistance now. And I'm not just talking about the people here. I'm talking about the so-called leadership. We don't have a circumstance where the leadership says, no, look, I'm going to call on my people to go down to the, to stage a protest or to stand by and offer resistance. No, they're the ones who they're among the ones who were going to hire the lawyers. Or worse yet, not hire lawyers, they're going to hire lobbyists. So they're not even going to defend themselves. They're going to throw a bunch of money at the opposition, hoping that he can sway them. Well, I'm sorry, that's not resistance, folks. That's not resistance. So when we're trying to stop a pipeline, and we're trying to stop some behavior that's going to adversely affect us, whether it's environmental, whether it's regulatory, whatever it is. Look, I got to tell you, I was really pleased with the way the Senecas, in particular, conducted themselves in the battle over, I think it was Coudersport or some little town in Pennsylvania that was going to receive a bunch of fracking wastewater, and it was going to go through their water treatment plant and then get dumped into the headwaters of the Allegheny River. And the Seneca people stepped up for that. I'm not saying the Seneca Nation officials didn't weigh in, but it wasn't just them. It wasn't just filing injunctions. It was really a broad-based approach to fighting this thing, almost unplanned. And I thought that was great. I was proud of the Senecas who stepped up. Well, I was proud of the Seneca Nation because it wasn't just the Senecas who showed up there. I mean, this was something that the entire Seneca Nation, the people, the leadership, all the way through could claim a victory on. And pressure was put on at all levels by the nation administration as well. But that's not usually, that's the first time I've seen that in a while. I mean, you got to go back to the 90s when you saw stuff like that. So, and the problem is that each generation who hasn't had the experience of real live resistance doesn't know how. And we don't teach it. I mean, they're sure as hell not going to learn it in a public school. But we should teach it. We should. And we should take the time to talk about why we don't stand to pledge allegiance to their flag. Why we have a problem with their national anthem. Why we shouldn't vote. Why we shouldn't register for the draft why our boys shouldn't register for the draft when they turn 18. We don't even have that conversation. And it sure doesn't have, it doesn't even have, I'm not crazy about top down, but I mean, we don't hear any advice that comes from the leadership, the people who have a responsibility to offer advice and counsel. I mean, the reason you select or elect people to sit on a council isn't just to be a council, COUNCIL, but they're supposed to have a skill set that allows them to provide COUNSEL. They should be able to provide you advice. And it's not that they're gonna impact you with, they're not gonna tell you what to do. It's not about them dictating your behavior. But the reason you should have chosen those people is because they should have some broad-based knowledge about how to resist. Because in the world that we live in, native governance, a large part of that responsibility is resistance. And if your government isn't resisting, if the people that you are empowering with you're vesting some of your power to, if they're not doing it, then you need to do it. Because if you're not asserting your own power to resist, and the folks that you have given some of that authority to aren't doing it, then nobody's doing it. And you can't assume that they're doing it. I mean, so that's part of the problem. But like I said, resistance isn't just about fighting. I mean, we talk about warriors or loriska lorget. I mean, we're not talking about just fighting back. It's about carrying some of that past forward. And I don't just mean ceremonies in a religious sense, but carrying some of that knowledge and implanting some of that and making sure that we are connected to our past and we carry that past forward. That's what Ongwe means. Human forever. So bringing a piece of that of what we know is human, because those people, I mean, we go back far enough and we can find people who really understood what to be human meant. Because to be human didn't mean just to be separate from the rest of creation, but to be a part of it. But knowing what part of it that we played. All right, we're at the bottom of the hour, so we'll take a break here. We'll go out with a little bit of song, and we'll come back and we'll chew this up a little bit more. What's that? Okay, all right. Okay. All right, so yeah, but we'll go out here in a little bit. But again, I want to talk more about this thing, and I wanted to spend a little bit more time explaining that resistance, and it isn't just about how it isn't just about fighting. It's about maintaining identity, because, like I said, I love the expression, "Our existence is resistance," but in order for that to be true, we have to make a conscious decision that what we are existing as is something distinct from what the powers that are working against us to eliminate us. All right, now we'll take a break. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. We'll be back after this. Thank you for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native, and we are talking Let's Talk Native Resistance. That's what we're talking about here today. But first, let me go ahead and thank my sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses for supporting what I do here on a weekly basis. I also want to thank Eric White and ERW Enterprises. He's another supporter who does something week to week to make sure that we can keep going. The folks at GRE and NWS, they make a contribution once a month to make sure we do. But I also have a few people who help from time to time. I had a little bit of a setback here. My I roached my vehicle here just recently, and and a few people, my good friend like Harry Wallace down in Puspatuck, and Dr. Chabet down in Yonkers, and a few others have stepped up to help me get my wheels situated again. Those are the kinds of things that help us do what we're doing here. And look, on the point that I'm talking about here, when we talk about resistance, sometimes it's about supporting others who are providing a service. But let me break some of that down too, because look, when I said even if the ones that you are caring most for are in your immediate household, that's unfortunately we have adopted this concept of nuclear family a little bit, which is again not our concept. We talked about clans. We have a broader sense about what family is historically and culturally. And so we brought some of that stuff in tight. But look, I'm not going to minimize the role of parenting. It's extremely important. But part of that parenting is about is about preparing our kids for what they are going to experience out there. Whether we have to teach our kids to be perhaps a little more competitive when it comes to sports, or understanding as they are being taught certain subjects, that there's always going to be Eurocentric, whether it's math, science, literature, whatever it is, and that we help our kids process the way they're being educated. Especially, like I said, most of our kids are being educated in public schools, so what they're being taught is laced with propaganda. So we have to make sure that we play an integral part in our kids' education, even if we aren't homeschooling them. So when they get fed a bunch of BS about Columbus or Pilgrims or westward expansion, we got to make sure our kids are being taught some truths there, because most of what they're going to be taught in school is going to be wrong. I mean, it's either going to be a blatant lie or with so much omission. Look, they teach, our kids are being taught in school when it comes to history, like we were this period that ended with colonization. I mean, no, when I was a kid, they taught, history in periods. So there was, Indians, discovery, colonialization, those were each periods of American history. Civil War, and of course, Depression and World War I, World War II. All this is the way they broke it all down, as if one period ended and the next one started. Well, again, we're still here. Our existence is our resistance, to some extent. But we are here through all of it. We were here. And sometimes either affected or even sometimes pulled in to the fights that white people are having against each other, pulled into their race wars and their slave wars and their Jim Crow and the civil rights. We got pulled into all that stuff, even the stuff that wasn't necessarily our fight. Of course, their wars: World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. Desert Storm, all of this stuff. Our people, our people signed up willingly for a lot of this stuff, even without being, fighting over the draft. We get sucked into their politics. I mean, we got politicians making overtures, not because we're a vote that matters to them. Why? Because it plays well. Now, look, as a part of the study of humanities and the study of civilization, there are many people along the way who've said that you judge a civilization by how the most marginalized people are treated. So we're low-hanging fruit for white people to feel good about themselves, or black people running in these elections. Oh yeah, they can make it sound like they've made great overtures to us, that they care. Oh, they care. But what they don't care about, and even the native guy, the guy who I had on this show, Mark Charles, I mean, he doesn't care about our distinction and our autonomy. No, he's advocating assimilation. Oh, we have to be part of we the people. We the people didn't include women. It didn't include Native people. It didn't include black people. Well, you know what? By all means, we the people should include, all people who want to be U.S. citizens. And this is where we got to rethink who we are. There was a time where you couldn't tell a Native person on the Canadian side. You called somebody Canadian, you've been ready for a fight. And it wasn't just Mohawks. I mean, there was a lot of people you wouldn't use that expression. But now, man, people get sucked right into, the fight over their next prime minister. I heard somebody say they'd rather have Justin Trudeau, who lies and doesn't keep promises, than the Scheer, who the danger might be if he does keep his promises because of what he's promised to do. When 9/11 took place, Native people rushed out to get their Canadian or their U.S. passports because they knew that they're going to have trouble. They're going to have trouble trying to cross the border, going from Native territory. So to maintain their relationship with their families on either side of that imaginary line, we about fell over ourselves trying to recognize that imaginary line. And worse than that, we made sure that we got their documentation and we fit into their classifications of identity so we wouldn't be held up. A lot of Native territories in the Seneca Nation, they adopted the enhanced tribal cards, ETCs, enhanced tribal cards. You know what an enhanced tribal card is? It's kind of like the enhanced driver's license. A little RFID chip on there. But the first requirement, even when the Seneca Nation send out their communications on, here's what you got to get your enhanced tribal card. First thing was proof of American citizenship or Canadian citizenship. You could be a Canadian citizen and get an enhanced tribal card. But you needed proof of citizenship. And they weren't talking about Seneca Nation. They're talking about U.S. or Canadian. Why? Because on that enhanced tribal card, you know what gets stuck up in the corner? A U.S. or Canadian flag. That card was specifically designed, and the requirements for what they call the Department of Homeland Security or their Western Hemisphere Travel Initiative. I called it WHITey. To be WHITey compliant, you had to have that card had to serve as a proof of U.S. or Canadian citizenship. So it was a U.S. ID card that you get to put Seneca Nation on it. And I'm not picking on Seneca Nation because you know what? That whole program was a bust here. I think about 100 people signed up for a card. And they had to pay extra for it too. So what was the enhanced tribal card? Here's what it was. It was a card that had 5 requirements. First off, proof of U.S. or Canadian citizenship. Or I guess it could have been Mexican citizenship too. I don't know. But proof of a citizenship of a real country, right? Not a tribe. So it had to be proof of a national citizenship. It had to have an expiration date because they wanted you to have to renew it every couple of years. They wanted a photograph that allowed the data collection from that picture that could be entered into the federal facial recognition programs that they have. Their technology. They wanted to be compliant with their facial recognition technology. So they wanted you in their system. They wanted a scannable barcode on it, or whether however it would be, whether it was magnetic or whether it was just a barcode, whatever. They wanted a scannable strip on it, so they could take your card and they could run it through their scanner and pull up all the information on you. Now, who provided that information? They could create their own file once they had you in their system, not our system. They could create a file that they could pull up in a moment's notice. Now the RFID chip, this was and that stands for radio frequency identification chip. This is so they didn't need to scan. They didn't need to take it out, run through a scanner. The claim was that you could just hold it up as you went by a border checkpoint, and they could pull all your data off that just by holding the card up. Well, the reality is, to some extent, they could pull information off that card right sitting in your wallet. So this was a way that they could pull through radio frequency your identity without you even producing your ID card for them. And in some cases, not even take it out of your wallet. We, Native people, were being sucked into creating these things. Now, again, we could talk about identity, but if that's what an ID is, it's an identity card. I got into a debate with this woman who sits on one of these high commissions at the UN. When I talked about the failure of not just the United States and Canada, but the international community recognizing our right to create our own travel documents. I said, they force us to get a U.S. passport. And she says, well, I've got a U.S. passport, but it doesn't change my identity. What the hell are you talking about? Of course it changes your identity. I mean, or it defines you. It's literally what it's for. It's used for identification. The word identity is right in the word. So again, I don't want to belabor that point because I don't think, again, documents, papers, your driver's license or your business card, I don't think those are what identifies you. I don't think your identity is solely wrapped in it. But I think we should have some control about how we represent identifying ourselves, whether it's, an identification record, a document. I think, our right to produce our own travel documents should be something that we have the right to do. Of course we should. And not just because the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People says it, or the U.S. Declaration on Human Rights says it. It should be a basic human right without it being written down in a document or a declaration. But if we are already allowing ourselves to be manipulated, look, when I start hearing the likes of Oren Lyons, this iconic face of Native people, or Suzanne Harjo, or any of these others running around, forget about these newcomers like this Mark Charles who was trying to sell books by running for president. Forget about these guys. I'm talking about some of these people who have been around. When I hear those guys telling people to go out and vote, when I hear those people telling, like, somehow we have a responsibility for the Americans to get rid of their sitting president, they're the morons that put that moron in there, not us. I think Donald Trump is the president the United States deserves. We'll see if they deserve him again. But, I mean, so this whole idea that some of these so-called Native leaders, the ones that are so respected by white people, and Native people, are out there telling people that. I mean, the fact that everybody got so enamored because Deborah Haaland and Sharice David became congresswomen, they're not the first. In fact, most Native people who have been a part of the Congress, the Senate, or the House have been Republicans. Yeah, these two are Democrats. But you know what? That's the left and right of the same bird. They're Americans. They're voted in by white people. That's who votes them in. The white people vote as a higher percentage of their population. They are the highest percentage of the U.S. population. Our numbers are, really almost negligible, less than 1/10%, or less than less than 0.7%, I guess, of the U.S. population. And no, they can embellish that if they use a census that says, oh yeah, all those people who claimed without any documentation, self-identified as Native people. Yeah, there's a lot of that. But again, I mean, I'm not satisfied with somebody looking at me like I'm Elizabeth Warren. I mean, these people who want to self-identify as Native people and have no connection. Look, and I've said this before, there's a difference between having Native ancestry and having Native heritage. And I know these are two words that are they're not our words, but look, if you have no connection to culture, DNA doesn't define somebody's identity. Identity is who you are, not a what you are. So I mean, identity isn't something that somebody's going to go to 23andMe and say, okay, yeah, look, I found out who I am. No, you didn't. I mean, if you were that confused about who you are and you needed somebody, you needed to spit to have somebody tell you who you were, then you're even more confused about who you are now than you were before you did that. Look, identity is what you do. It's about your relationship with people. I mean, we hear people say all the time, well, somebody can't claim to be native if their tribe, if the Cherokee don't recognize you as Cherokee, then you're not Cherokee. Well, I'm not even sure if that's entirely true. Why? Who decides the Cherokee, the federally recognized Cherokee? Those are tribe, bands, or nation of Indians subordinate to the laws of the United States. They're not. I mean, so even so-called native governance, if they get their power through federal recognition, as opposed to, again, being in a way their own progenitors of identity. If your elected leaders are completely assimilated and you're voting for them anyway, you're no different than the people who voted for Trump. You better make sure that the people who you are going to select to carry your voice. So I don't care if you're talking about traditional governance or elected governance. Regardless of that, if you are not making sure the people who you are willing to say represent you are identifying themselves and maintaining a certain level of identity for you, then you damn sure better do it yourself. I said it before. The best way to prevent the abuse of authority is to not give it. And the best way to solve the abuse of authority is to take it back. So don't give up your authority to somebody if you don't have the utmost confidence. I mean, that's why this whole crazy American system or the Canadian system where you're told you have a choice. So we're going to give you two bad choices, and that's what you get to choose from. If that's not democracy, and it's not really a choice. If you got two bad choices, I mean, if you don't have good choices, if you're choosing the lesser of two evils because of left or right or conservative and liberal or Republican and Democrat or whatever, you don't have a choice. But the same thing for Native people. We should make sure the people that we prop up, through our clan system, or the people who run for office in elected style systems, that it's not just a popularity vote. There should be a certain level of competency there. And if you're not, and look, I get it. There may not be people who can be propped up on a council, however that council is created, that can accurately represent you. Then don't let them represent you. Say, no, I'm going to help put you out. I'll support putting you in that position, but I'm not putting you in that position to represent me. You're not my leader. You are my servant. I mean, that's what the whole idea of leadership is supposed to be. It's about being in the service of your people. But see, we got this all twisted around. We think, the Americans, winning an election is like winning a lottery. Look at these guys in the American political system. They become multi-millionaires, sometimes billionaires, even though their jobs only pay them, a couple $100,000 a year. Well, how do you think that works out? You think all of a sudden, they become wise investors? Oh, come on. Well, and it's the same thing, within our communities. We shouldn't treat sitting in office as if it was winning a lottery. But I got to tell you, I wish I could say, traditional governance is the only governance that has an integrity left, because it doesn't. I mean, look, I've seen some of these communities that claim to be traditional communities where, again, the haves and the have-nots can be divided along those who are sitting in these so-called leadership positions and those who aren't. And that's true for elected systems and for so-called traditional systems. I mean, again, when you're living large because because you get to wear feathers, then maybe we should rethink how we're doing that. And again, for us, for those who aren't carrying titles, however they get them, the more responsibility that we take up, the more that we define ourselves, the less somebody else can define ourselves for us. Because I don't want somebody out there telling Native people to vote, who's been put into a position of authority or responsibility. I mean, sure, you can tell them to vote in your or to participate in your own governance. I'm all for that. But again, we've got responsibility to our children. We got responsibility to our grandchildren. We have responsibility to the earth, to make sure that we are not destroying what sustains us. And if we're not doing that, man, if all we're trying to figure out is how to get a bigger paycheck at the end of the week, then our existence isn't our resistance. That's the whole point. The whole point is, yes, we should exist as the people we claim to be, not just, some label. I mean, I don't look, it's great that you have a Hiawatha belt sticker on the back of your car, or you've got those great tattoos and that kind of stuff. But if you don't know any of that means, if it's just decoration, I mean, if you identify yourself, through a clan, but you don't even know the title, the title of that clan. I don't mean the animal. I mean what title it is. Then you're not doing enough. Then you're not carving out your identity properly, or you are, but you're not doing enough. Put it that way. And see, this is where I look. Like I said, it'd be great to say that our ability to survive all of this genocide, the residential schools, massacres, the oppression, the reservation system, land theft, slavery, being bounties for our scalps. I mean, for us to survive all that is great if we can survive and still maintain some integrity to our identity, and not just survive as L. Frank Baum, once called us, a pack of whining cur that licks the hand that smites us. You know what licking the hand that smites us means? Voting in their elections. That's licking their hand. Running in, having 2 of 400 Congress people, 2 women in a Congress full of a House of Representatives full of 400 people saying, "Oh yeah, we're represented now." And again, I got to remind people, Mitch McConnell once told when there was talk about reparations for slavery, you know how he framed it one time? He said, "You don't need reparations. You already got your reparations. You had 8 years of Obama." He literally said to black people, "You don't get reparations because we let a black man in the White House for 8 years." That's what he considered reparations. Well, what the hell do you think they're going to consider Deborah Allen and Sharice David, or the 2 Republicans from Oklahoma or whoever? Now, we got nothing coming. You're part of the system now. Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Trudeau, he said, "Look, if you don't speak your language, if you don't have your native identity left, you got nothing coming. You're just one of us now. Don't talk to me about the Indian Act, or don't talk to me about your tribal rights, because if you haven't been able to maintain your identity, you're just a Canadian." And he meant that as an insult. So this is the way they view us. Because, it's funny. You get told, all these years of, what rights you don't have because you're native. And then as you assimilate, then you're told, well, you don't have any of those rights. You're you're one of us now. I mean, that's the ludicrous strategy that they've had. That's why they had kill the Indian, save the man. Because the man was a killed Indian, essentially, is the way they looked at it. So the way that we resist is to maintain our identity. That's how we resist. Again, maybe we don't spill out onto the thruway every time we have a conflict, but we still should be ready to. And the Senecas proved it in their fight over protecting the Allegheny River. I mean, that was one of the successful fights. I mean, we can talk about the Dakota Access Pipeline and, Keystone and some of these other, all these pipelines that we're trying to fight, all this environmental stuff. But we do have some victories along the way. And you know what? That one worked because everybody, so many people got involved. And you know what? We got involved. We even had white allies helping us. I don't mean just a few people trying to get some recognition. Yeah, I know some celebrities showed up at Standing Rock. But I think that I'll give you another example. The Hawaiians fighting the 30-meter telescope on Mauna Kea. Now everybody's more involved. In fact, even the people who used to be more only concentrating on Mauna Kea and not on Hawaiian independence, it was hard sometimes to get people who would it was hard to get the Mauna Kea folks to talk about Hawaii. I'm not doing that. I'm just talking about protecting our mountain. Well, now that they've merged, they have power, and I think they're going to stop that damn telescope. I do. And yeah, they've had some allies step up and some celebrities step up, Hawaiian and others. But they're gaining more support internationally too. See, that is about stepping up. Now, I'm not saying there aren't some real identity problems, that exist even for the Hawaiian people. Everything from Christianity to military service to to so much others. I mean, look, we have. I see plenty of people who believe in Hawaiian independence who are still advocating to vote. And I think that's problematic. But I'm also going to tell you right now, and I'm not suggesting that everything is an all or nothing proposition. So it's about the direction that we're going in. We're in a better spot today than we were in the 50s. Like I said, some of our people were throwing on Plains Indian headdresses because we had already lost our way about things like the stoas and some of our own culture. We got swept up in the Hollywood version of what our identity was. We were following them. We were trying to look like Iron Eyes Cody. We're better than that now. Now we understand what a mockery mascots are. Now we understand, what Hollywood did to our identity. And that's why we're stronger people for it. But you know what? Laced through all of that, we have an awful lot of people who are still willing to comply, still willing to again assimilate. Again, I think that our existence can be our resistance, but we have to work on our identity. And I talked about this before, and I just wanted to bring this up again this time. This is a good topic for today's show. So I want to thank you for listening, and I'm not sure. We'll be back here. We'll be back here on Tuesday. I'm not sure what my schedule in New York is next week, but we'll talk about that on Tuesday. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you back here on Tuesday. Yahweh.
Yeah, I should prefer to see the Aborigines. And the Indians, too. Good. This should be most enlightening.
What makes the red man red?
Teach 'em all about Red Man.
Your history books, your holidays, Thanksgiving lights.